Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission's annual Martin Luther King Jr. presentation. My name is Laura Argenbright. Many of you know me. I'm the Director of Communications for PHRC. So what an honor it is to host this presentation on the first National Day of Healing, and we are thrilled that our esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Anthony Montiero, agreed.
You're muted.
I'm sorry, we cannot mute all. So please, everyone is responsible for keeping themselves on mute throughout the recording. And we hope that you all will use great Zoom manners as we go through our program. Thank you. All right, so where were we? To start us off today, it's my pleasure to introduce PHRC's Executive Director, Chad Dion Lassiter. He himself is a scholar, a national expert, and a voice on race relations, and a recent recipient of the Pennsylvania Social Worker of the Year Award given by the National Association of Social Workers Pennsylvania chapter. E.D. Lassiter, would you please start us off with a few words?
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, greetings, and welcome to all. And more importantly, welcome to the beloved community that we are serious and dedicated to establishing here at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. It was intentional for us to have this the day after MLK Day. We know that yesterday there were several politicians on all sides who quoted King, but their actions from a policy perspective speaks differently to who Dr. King truly was. We know that yesterday there were people who were refacing lockers in schools, engaged in paint projects, and those things. And I guess for them that's necessary. But we were intentional once again that we wanted to follow up yesterday with today, a serious and frank conversation that emerges out of the Black radical tradition of who Dr. Martin Luther King was and who Martin Luther King still is. And so there's no better person for me who can do that and make sense of the moment that we find ourselves in than my dear mentor, dear friend, and dear brother, Dr. Anthony Montiero. So we thank you for taking time out of your schedules, both for the PHRC staff and the larger beloved community in the Commonwealth and elsewhere. And so once again, we bring greetings and we bring welcome. And I'll turn it back over to you, Laura.
All right, great. Thank you, Chad. So our next speaker is Zulay Roja. She's a PHRC administrative clerk and typist in the Philadelphia regional office. Zulay, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Laura. I just want to say good afternoon to all of my PHRC colleagues and everyone joining us via Zoom and Facebook Live. Dr. Anthony Montiero is a well-known activist, scholar, and intellectual. He started his civil rights activism at Zion Baptist Church under the leadership of Reverend Leon H. Sullivan. He would go on to be a part of the Black students movement at Lincoln University and the University of Chicago. He was part of the anti-Vietnam War movement, the movement for African independence and against apartheid and colonialism in Southern Africa. He was a delegate to the 6th Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Dr. Montiero took part in the movement to free Angela Davis and other political prisoners, including Mumia Abu Jamal. He took part in Philadelphia's Black political independence and empowerment movements, helping to elect several Black candidates. He himself ran for Congress in 1972. His activism led to his founding the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation, which is located at the historic Church of the Advocate in North Philadelphia. He was the principal organizer of the conference Reclaiming Our Future, the Black radical tradition in our time, which brought together over 2,000 scholars and activists, including Angela Davis and Cornel West and Reverend Jeremiah Wright. In 2017, he organized a 3-day conference on the life and work of James Baldwin. Montiero in 2018 organized a year-long celebration throughout Philadelphia of the 150th anniversary of the birth of W.E.B. Du Bois. In 2019, he led in organizing a year-long celebration of Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birthday anniversary. Montero's scholarship ranges over several disciplines and fields of knowledge, including sociology and the sociology of scientific knowledge, the sociology of race-class dynamic, W.E.B. Du Bois studies, and the Black radical tradition. He is best known and highly cited for his work on Du Bois, which he continues to pursue as part of understanding the conditions of a new Black freedom movement. Montiero has been a professor at several universities, including University of Sciences, Temple University, University of Pennsylvania, Drexel University, and Rutgers University. He is a well-known and respected lecturer. He has spoken regularly at annual celebrations of the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. throughout the nation. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Anthony Montiero.
Thank you very much, Sulai. That was a very generous introduction. I appreciate it very much. Allow me to extend my thank yous to Chad Lassiter, the PHRC, and the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf, for giving me this opportunity. Let me begin by making a confession. For several years, maybe since the nation has officially celebrated Martin Luther King's birth, I would awake each day, each of these days, filled with a nagging anxiety and a sense of unhappiness. I would push those feelings behind me and get on with the day of celebration, not really dealing with the cause of my feelings of anxiety and unhappiness. Until this year, I confronted them. And it occurred to me that I have been for all these years grieving Martin Luther King's death and the magnitude of its meaning to the life world of this nation and to Black folk. And I believe that, like myself, the nation has not fully grieved the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and what it has meant for this nation. So while we officially celebrate his birth, we push our national grief further into our collective subconsciousness. In a sense, we normalize our moral hypocrisy concerning King and our inability to confront what is in fact the troubles of our time and what Martin Luther King would have to say about them. In fact, if 50 years from now, or maybe 100 years from now, historians, philosophers, theologians, social psychologists, and other learned people gathered to diagnose what happened to America and what brought us to the moment that we are in now. I believe their diagnosis would say, in large part, the nation ended up divided, confused, and in moral chaos because of the assassination and death of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. An event that the nation has not recovered from and has left us without the moral leadership that he so eloquently provided. And so with his death, the nation has been left morally adrift. We as a nation and as a people are spiritually empty, morally confused, and intellectually and culturally in a state of decadence. All of this is witnessed by us all on a daily basis, through the media, through films, through books, through popular culture. It is therefore reasonable, indeed existentially necessary, to ask at this time, what would Martin Luther King say to our nation were he alive? We must first acknowledge the depth and intensity of the crisis our nation is in. I would observe that this is the greatest crisis since the Civil War, and maybe the greatest crisis in the history of the nation. We could point to all of the structural and systemic factors and phenomena that point to this crisis. But I think what demonstrates this crisis more than anything else is the state of the people and the consciousness of the people, especially of working people, the poor, young people, and the lower middle classes. 70% of the American people say the nation is headed in the wrong direction. 11 million people last year up and quit their jobs in the midst of what we are told is an economic recovery where wages are rising. Young people from all areas of the economic and social structure say they have no future under the existing system. All major US institutions, from the presidency, the Congress, government generally, universities and professors, the news media, the military, and on, face crises of legitimacy. That is to say, people don't trust them or believe in their leadership. People look upon their governmental leaders as self-serving, often as narcissists, who put their personal interests ahead of national service. As such, in droves, people are withdrawing from the public sphere and from civil society. For the majority of American people, the most common experience at this time is grinding inflation, economic uncertainty, and violence at every level of society. People do not trust popular culture that most people feel normalizes and promotes selfishness, individualism, materialism, and other values that most Americans wish to transcend and go beyond. In pop culture, there's a primacy of the value of getting rich rather than uplifting the spirits of the people. It is what it is, and we are what we have become. So what would King say? His message in the darkest times was a message of optimism and human possibility. He called for a radical revolution of values, a revolution that would lead to a society that could be defined as a beloved community and a world order that was, as he would put it, a world house built upon peaceful coexistence rather than mutual annihilation between peoples, nations, and civilization. My topic today: what would Martin Luther King say to a nation trapped in the wilderness of chaos and confusion? That topic is inspired by King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Community or Chaos? And it seems that in many ways we have chosen chaos over community. I draw upon three of King's most important writings as a way of talking about what King would say to us. His letter from a Birmingham jail, written in April of 1963, while he was in prison for leading protests against segregation in the city of Birmingham, Alabama. Secondly, his speech, For a Time to Break Silence, Why I Oppose the War in Vietnam, delivered at the historic Riverside Chapel in New York City on April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was assassinated. And finally, his most delivered speech and sermon, Three Dimensions of a Complete Life. Before going in a little more detail in these speeches, I want to say that we must acknowledge, if we are to be true to Martin Luther King Jr., that his body of work is an almost inexhaustible source of ideas for our time and this historic crisis. King speaks more to our time than do Jefferson, John Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, or Lincoln, to name but a few. They were all Democrats with a small d, and radical for their time. But King goes beyond them and speaks to us in ways they cannot. King, in his body of work, expands upon and makes relevant fields of knowledge as varied as philosophy, theology, comparative religion, moral theory and practice, theories of democracy and democratic change. For me to think of King otherwise than as this great intellectual and only as a civil rights or Black leader, as noble as those things are, is to not really see King and not see his relevance for this time and for the crisis that our nation faces. In fact, I believe it is a way to trivialize King and to deny the enormous meaning of his thinking and action for our time. In fact, I would say that King, as a thinker and in terms of the history of human thought, is a great synthesizer, by which I mean he brings together great bodies of thought, everything from German idealism of the 18th and 19th century to Hindu philosophy and the theories of Mahatma Gandhi, to theories of the Black church and Black Christianity as represented by such thinkers as Howard Thurman and William Nelson, among others. King is this great synthesizer, and he synthesizes these great bodies of thought for the sake of bringing people together for the sake and purpose of social change to lift humanity from the stage of depression and crisis to freedom. Let me begin with King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Again, authored in 1963, while he was leading protests against segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. In a lot of ways, the letter from a Birmingham jail is a wake-up call to the nation, calling upon the nation, as he put it, to get on the right side of the world revolution. King defined the world revolution in terms of the zeitgeist, the spirit of that time, that all peoples and nations were striving for freedom. The nations of Africa and Asia were breaking the chains of colonialism. People were fighting for civil rights and human rights throughout the world. King called this a revolutionary time, and he called upon the American people not to be complacent, but to get on the right side of the world revolution. He also said this was like getting on the right side of history. He said that we had to be a part of humanity, not separate and apart from it. There was, he said in this letter, a fierce urgency of now, an urgency to act. He said, time waits for no one. And the moment to act comes only once in a while. And at times we sleep through a great revolution. He argued that we could not allow this moment. And the moment he was talking about was, of course, in the 1960s. I would say the same goes for now. We cannot allow this moment to pass. To allow it to pass would be to condemn ourselves to live in the dark shadow of disappointment. He insists in the letter from a Birmingham jail, and he was addressing 7 clergymen from Birmingham who had written a letter to him asking that he call off the demonstrations for freedom. So he was writing to 7 clergymen. He said to them that you can't be halfway for freedom and justice. You're either for freedom and justice or you're not for it. He said there is no virtue in moral compromise. He said to them that the Christian Bible was clear, the life of Christ was clear about what Christians should do in times of crisis and how Christians should address issues of oppression and injustice. Drawing upon the English poet John Donne, he says, "No man is an island entire of itself. All life," he reminds us, "is interrelated, and we are all wrapped in a single garment of destiny." He is saying, therefore, there is no individualistic way to solve problems that are societal. For many, this is inconceivable. For wasn't our nation founded upon individual freedom, including the freedom of speech and the freedom to carry a gun? How can King say in the middle of the 20th century that may have worked at the end of the 18th century, but in the world in which he and we lived, we must recognize that we are all wrapped in a single garment of destiny. And what affects one directly affects us all indirectly. If there is injustice anywhere in the world, it threatens justice everywhere in the world. And so we must act, and we must act in ways that acknowledges that none of us are separate from all of us. We are part of humanity, he says. There are no great me's and little you's. There is no me above you. Hence, we must find a collective way out. We must find a way out that does not make the me greater than the we. And we must see each one of us as part of a we, as part of a single destiny, a common struggle. The logic of the letter from a Birmingham jail is further concretized in his magnificent speech of April 1967 at Riverside Cathedral in New York City, the speech opposing the war in Vietnam. This was not an easy speech to give for him. By the time he gives his speech at Riverside Church, he had already made his position on the war in Vietnam known. He was against it. Many civil rights leaders, politicians, and newspapers, including the New York Times and Washington Post, came out against his opposition to the war in Vietnam. How, many said, could Dr. King oppose President Lyndon Johnson's war when it was Johnson who signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965? Others said, and this might sound very strange today, that peace and civil rights don't mix. That either you're a civil rights and Black leader or you're an anti-war and peace leader. The two don't come together. King, of course, makes the opposite argument, that the struggle for justice is part and parcel of the struggle for peace, that the struggle for freedom and the struggles for peace are inseparable, and that violence and inhumanity being carried out by the US military in Vietnam was a form of violence against the American people. He would say that the bombs dropped in Vietnam explode in the inner cities of Detroit and Philadelphia and Los Angeles and other cities, that it was the poor who were paying the price in this country for an adventure in Vietnam. King would not only connect civil rights to anti-war, he would connect poverty to the fight against war. He would call for reduction, a radical reduction of the military budget, and for a guaranteed annual income for all Americans. He would say, and I'd like to quote from that speech. He said, "The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit. And if we ignore this sobering reality, we will find ourselves organizing clergy and laymen concerned, that was the organization that sponsored the speech, committees for the next generation. They will be concerned about Guatemala and Peru. They will be concerned about Thailand and Cambodia. They will be concerned about Mozambique and South Africa. We will be marching for these and dozens other names and attending rallies without end unless there is a significant and profound change in American life and policy. Such thoughts take us beyond Vietnam, but not beyond our calling as sons of the living God. And then he will say, I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. King, in 1967, was speaking more clearly and more courageously to us in 2022 than any politician, any public intellectual, any clergyman on the scene today. Lastly, I'd like to talk about a sermon that was given by King more often than any other in his career. The title of it is 3 Dimensions of a Complete Life. It was his inaugural speech at his first church that he ministered in Montgomery, Alabama. My favorite version of it is when he gave it in 1962 at Yale University. In this sermon, or speech as it were, King said that all of us must strive to live complete lives. I interpret completeness to mean moral completeness, becoming a whole human being, and as such, being able, in whatever way we can, to make a difference in the world and in our societies. How else, except as complete human beings, can we address the problems of violence and uncertainty and despair and pessimism? How can our lives be examples for those less educated, those more down the chain in despair and pessimism? How can our lives be examples unless they are complete? The question of a complete life confronts each and every one of us every day if we are not to fall into the trap of hypocrisy and double standards and double speak. I think you all know the game. King says that the first dimension of a complete life is that dimension that focuses upon us as individuals, that we all want to live a long life. It's very popular these days to talk about self-care, my house, my gym membership, me. King says there's nothing wrong with that. There is value in caring about yourself, in loving yourself. One of the great problems that we Black folk have faced over historical time is that we don't value ourselves enough. We've been told so long that we are less than, that for many of us, this value has been internalized, that we are not as beautiful as other people, that our hair is not as good as other people's, that our lips are too big, that we're not as intelligent as other people. So we Black people must struggle to value ourselves as individuals, and King acknowledges that. He said the second dimension, however, is not just to love ourselves, but to love humanity. This is the single garment of destiny level of a complete life. To change the conditions in which people live, especially the poor and oppressed, young people, those who are uneducated. You know, in Philadelphia, at one time in this city, almost everybody worked. And the most revered person in poor Black communities, in working class Black communities, was the working man and woman coming home from work. He or she was looked up to more than a professor, a doctor, a lawyer often. And at that time, the majority of people who worked in Philadelphia were in unions. Then came deindustrialization. Jobs left the city. They went to the South and ultimately out of the country. You can go around the city of Philadelphia and you can see old factories that are abandoned, have been abandoned for years. You can drive by Dobbins Vocational School, this beautiful, beautiful structure where young people would go to learn a skill, and they would leave high school with the assurance that they could get a job. People wanted jobs because they wanted to buy homes. One of the things that made marriage such an appealing thing is that we could put two incomes together and we could buy a house. I don't know how many people remember when Philadelphia was a homeowner's city. New York was something incomprehensible to a Philadelphia where everybody lived in an apartment. In Philadelphia, we all owned homes, and people would buy a little small house with the hope in a couple of years of buying a larger house. And then once they bought a house, they wanted to buy a car. And people worked so they could improve their lives and educate their children and make for a better public education system. That seems like paradise today compared to the city of Philadelphia, which is broken. And nobody in government, in academia, in public life seems to have an answer to what's going on in this city. So King would say, the second dimension of a complete life is that dimension that puts humanity up front. The human struggle. No man is an island. To see the we before the me. To see me only in relationship to the we. To reject a culture of celebrity and money and excess, and thus the life of humility. And then he said the third dimension. King said this is the most difficult dimension to achieve. It is where we approach what is infinite, that which cannot be grasped by human intelligence, that dimension for which there is not a scientific explanation. In this dimension, it is the connection of the finite we to the infinite. This is the cosmological dimension. It compels us to be humble, to be servants of something that we cannot see or touch. King would quote the North African Pope, St. Augustine, who said, man is made for God. Man is made to be humble, to see him and herself as part of a larger cosmic reality. And that in striving to go beyond the physical, the individual, and even the all humanity, we strive for a level of goodness that most of us think is unrealizable. A level of commitment to more than just what we see as life. And to recognize, and this is King, that some things are so important that you must be prepared to give up your life to achieve them. Because life does not conclude with the physical, with the immediate, what we can feel and touch. Let me end with this. These are very serious times. All of you might not agree with me in my description and assessment of the crisis this country is in. Allow me to repeat it. This is the greatest crisis since the Civil War, and maybe the greatest crisis in the history of the country. The people are divided, without leadership, morally confused. People are retreating into their private lives. Churches are being shut down, even being sold. I find that very difficult to understand, the selling of a church, especially historic ones like Mother Zoar African Methodist Church. People are wandering the streets of this country. People don't come out of their houses. Homelessness is everywhere. It's normalized. We accept it. This is unimaginable at any other time. If we were not living it, no one could have said to us that this great nation, this rich country, this powerful nation would end up where we are today. You just couldn't have, no one could have convinced you of it. No one could have convinced me that Philadelphia would become a renter city rather than a homeowner city. I could never have believed, even though I grew up in a neighborhood where heroin and other drugs were everywhere, and there was gang violence. But I can't believe what I'm seeing in terms of violence in the city of Philadelphia. You could never have convinced me that we would not have a public education system in this city. You could not have told me that 46% of young people drop out of school before they graduate. It was unbelievable. But here we are. And the question for us is what is to be done? And therefore, I think we must commit ourselves beyond this day of celebration and reverence to study King, not as some eviscerated preacher who gave a couple of good speeches, but we must see him as the most important figure in American history since the Civil War. We must understand that if we are to come out of the crisis that we're in, and all signs indicate that it could get much worse, we need the moral guidance and social thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. America, be still and know. Be still and know that we are not God. We have to humble ourselves in order to change ourselves. I thank you once again for this opportunity, and if there are questions, I really would welcome answering them. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to go right to Zulai for any Q&A. If you have a question, a question and comment for Dr. Montiero, feel free to come off of your mute and chime in.
Good afternoon. My name is Adrian Garcia. Thank you so much for your commentary. I'm drawn to your initial comment that you would wake up every year feeling a certain way, and I get that because when I started observing Martin Luther King Day professionally as part of my job, I took a lot of pause in using the word celebration. And today it still gives me pause, right? Because I'm like, if anything, it's a reminder of how far we have to get to actually celebrate. So, for me, it's always a day of reflection and what can I do in this work to move things forward. And then whenever I'm out speaking to people, it's really about that. It's about that observance and knowing that we're all in this together. It's going to take all of us. And I think that part of it is also just knowing that there is so much work to do and that we are not living up to the tenements of, in my case, of the Fair Housing Act, which was to promise diversity and inclusion in neighborhoods. So I think there's a lot to do and a lot of work to do and a lot of path to undertake. I just wanted to share that with you and thank you once again for your comments.
And thank you for your comments. My feeling, and I know this more concretely among Black folk, there's a deep grieving that we have not done. When you don't grieve properly and you push it into the subconsciousness, it's there, but you can't figure out why you're not feeling a certain way. You don't feel good. And that's, every year I would wake up, anticipating whatever activity I would go to for King's birthday. And I I never felt good. It was anxiety, that kind of feeling. And I finally figured out just this year what it was. I had not properly grieved, and I said to myself, the nation has not properly grieved the death of King. And I think, and I'll be quiet after this, I think to properly grieve this great loss and its magnitude, we have to confront the real Martin Luther King, not this watered down version. And we must acknowledge, and I'll say this again, King speaks more to us today than he did then, in the 60s when he was alive, 50s and 60s. But he speaks more to this crisis than Jefferson, John Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, Lincoln. He really does. He speaks to us. And if we are to resolve the crisis of our society and of the American people, there is no better place to begin to think about how to get out of this than Martin Luther King Jr. He is just that consequential in human thought and in world and American history.
I see a
Thank
hand.
you.
We'll go to Amy Glock and then Daniel Jacobs.
Oh, actually, Daniel had his hand up first, so I'll yield to him.
We'll go to Daniel and then Amy.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'll be quick. Thank you once again, Dr. Montiero, for your presentation. I always appreciate listening to you speak. I was interested in what you see as what's similar about King's moment and ours, and also what's kind of different. I guess I was thinking about the way in which King approached, in a very principled manner, his goals in terms of social change. So at certain times, King had advised Republicans, at other times he had advised Democrats. And as you were mentioning at the end, especially with his speeches on Vietnam, he had really stayed with this principle and said, no, there has to be some kind of break or something different in that sense. As you were mentioning in your speech, this might be a period where there's also a lot of transition. And so that might be something similar to King. So I'm interested in what you see as kinds of, I don't want to put it as strategy, but hopefully you understand what I mean by what we can draw from King's approach to social change and how that could be appropriate for today. And so thank you again, Dr. Montiero, for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to see you again. Yeah, that's a very, very important question. I very strongly believe that if you study King's ideas, he seems to be speaking to the now time. In a certain sense, I believe those in power seek to diminish this now time message of Dr. King because he was so critical of those in power, of the power structure, of the elites, of the ruling class. He was so critical, and it was obvious. But, I'll put it this way. You've heard of the statement, nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Believe me, Danny, and I saw King as a kid, as a teenager. And I have to tell you all this, another confession. You know how when you're young, you don't want to agree with anybody that's older than you. Oh, they're older, they don't understand. But then I was like that, of course, but I thought King was too perfect to be real. I said, no, this is not real. He's manufactured by the liberal media. But he was everything that I saw. But I say that to say this. His ideas mean more today than then. The time for his ideas had not come in his lifetime, but they are ideas for today. That is the measure of a great thinker, when ideas have a life that go way beyond the person who put them forward. There are thinkers, for example, Hegel or others, Marx, who we're still debating about today. King is like that. The only difference is that, and I'll put it this way, and forgive me, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody. There is a conspiracy to reduce King to something that he would not recognize. You see what I'm saying? To diminish him, to trivialize him. To know King is to know his ideas, his vision, his philosophy. And as I said, I can see his contribution to multiple areas of knowledge, including theology, comparative religion, philosophy, democratic theory, the theory of democratic change, social movement theory, sociology. You see what I'm saying? But for reasons that I think are obvious, this anti-establishment, social change, moral hero must be diminished. But we must discover him. It is upon us. And that's what, what I mentioned at the end of it. 3 dimensions of a complete life. That completeness that comes with humility and recognition of there's much more to the cosmic world, the cosmic movement, than just you or I, or even just humanity, because history moves forward. It's almost like a cosmic cycle. But we could get more into that. Thank you, Danny. I appreciate your question.
All right, Amy, you're up next.
Hi, Dr. Montiero. How are you? Question for you.
How's the weather in California?
It's nice today. It's
Okay.
nice today. But question for you. It's nice to see you, of course. So what do you think that King would say about the state of unions today? And then what suggestions would he have to like recenter and strengthen them as a solution to many of the issues that you're talking about today? Obviously, we have some unions throughout the country that are very strong and very active and really fighting for the rights of the workers. But then we also have some unions that were strong and are no longer strong. I'm thinking about, I live in California, so we're a really pro-union state. We really support each other's unions. But at the same time, like my CFA union right now is like attacking its members for telling them that they need to go back to the collective bargaining table and renegotiate what they've presented for us as a tentative agreement. So I'm just kind of curious. I know he was a supporter of unions. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, because again, we have so many really strong unions that have gone on strike and have really done the work, but then we have some unions that are not, and that were, but are no longer. So just wondering what King's suggestions might be for future strengthening as a solution to some of the issues that you've posed today and discussed.
Yes. King was a firm believer in unions, and he was in some ways a co-founder, a co-builder of the Hospital Workers Union, which at one time was very powerful here in Philadelphia, 1199C. Led by the great Henry Nicholas, who comes out of the civil rights movement. And, out of the movement in Memphis, Tennessee, when he was supporting the sanitation workers, well, he was killed on the battlefield of justice for workers and for the least of these. And King always said that all work is dignified, you know, and all workers deserve to be able to bargain collectively to better their lives and the lives of their families and of their communities. So he was always a union man. He would often say, if Black people win, the unions win. You know, so he was there. He was there. Over the last year, you know, coming out of the COVID and so on, there have been a number of strikes. Workers have won certain wages, wage gains, but 11 million workers walked away from their jobs last year. And a lot of that has to do with they might be giving workers higher wages, but workers are not satisfied with the conditions that they're working under. And I know you as a college professor out there in California, by the way, most college professors are workers and they need to recognize it, especially the adjuncts and the part-time professors, and they all deserve to be in unions and have a right to collectively bargain, even against their department chairs, who are usually a part of the administration, but we can get further into that at another time. But yes, King was a union man. And you can't be a progressive and not be for unions. And that's why I was talking about Philadelphia. I don't know if anyone else here can remember those times where almost everybody worked, where the most respected person was that man or woman. And we were kids sitting on our steps and just, you know, looking up to these people as they came home from work. But more than that, almost everybody that worked was in a union in Philadelphia. Oh, what I wanted to say also, and I'll end on this. King, in leading the sanitation workers' struggle, helped to build the AFSCME union, which, you know, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Workers, which brought into its coalition, into its fold, all of these sanitation workers. And that made District Council 33 one of the most politically powerful unions in the city of Philadelphia, along with 1199C. And it elevated within the union movement Black leadership and women's leadership in the trade union movement. And so the unions became forces fighting not just for wages and benefits and conditions, but for social progress. And that was King's impact through people like Bill Lucy and Henry Nicholas and others, his impact upon the union movement. And last point, to break down the segregation of the building trades union. You know, the carpenters, the electricians, the plumbers, who excluded Black workers. And it was the civil rights movement linked to the working class movement that really democratized unions, created caucuses in unions, Black caucuses, progressive caucuses, and so on. So that's where I would answer that, Amy. Thank you for your question.
We have another question in the chat from Peter Dan. Peter Dan wants to know, since the administration has seemingly abdicated its responsibility with respect to COVID and our economic malice, where do we go from here with respect to the community concretely?
Well, you know, that is the question. That is the question. And I'm not a political appointee, I'm not a politician, so I might speak a little differently. But people are increasingly coming to realize that the politicians and the political structures do not serve them. You know, Malcolm X said, I think it was 1961, commenting upon the election then, and I think it goes in spades for today. We put them first and they put us last. Look at Philadelphia. Look at Philadelphia. What politician? I can't name a politician that I or anybody else could go to help solve any significant problems. Public education, you know, it seems like the city council is sitting around with their feet up on their desks with no answers. Murderous gun violence in Black and poor communities, open air drug markets, where you can go to Kensington and see people openly shooting up fentanyl and heroin and other things, while big buildings, skyscrapers are going up in Center City and neighborhoods are being gentrified. People cannot own a home. Taxes are driving them out of their homes and out of their neighborhoods. And the politicians are silent. We put them first and they put us last. And that goes in spades for Black folk who have been completely loyal over the last 50 years to the Democratic Party. And here in Philadelphia, I helped elect a lot of people. And I'm not, you know, I don't think I'm so proud of that right now. Because I put them first and I think they put me last. But yeah, that's the way I would answer it. It is the people, it is the King vision. The humble fighter for what is right. The person that does what is right, not because they will be known or paid off or congratulated for it, but because it's right. You know, King once said that some people do things because they get personal recognition from it. Some people do it because they get paid for it. But he said, I do it because it's right. I just look, you talk about the beloved community. Those are communities of people who live and act, not because they're going to be congratulated, not because they're going to make money out of it to set up their business, but because it is right. That ain't going to be everybody. It's what W.E.B. Du Bois called the guiding 100. Give me 1 in 100, and we can bring about social change. But until that one connects with another one and says, we are acting on the third dimension of life, until that is infused into the life world and the crisis of our society, the change that we all want will never be brought about.
That was beautifully put. And it goes right into the question that our next person put in the chat, Marsha Berry. She said, thank you so much for a powerful talk. It seems like in this moment of hyper individualism, we also have some people caught up in hyper identity politics. So what are your insights as to how we truly work together and build a broader and broader coalitions where the quote, me is not bigger than the we?
That's right.
And I think you just answered that.
And she, the way she asked the question that she asked answers itself. Her beautiful way of putting it. You know, see, King did not believe in cancel culture. He went into the South among people who were brought up and all of their lives had imbibed anti-Black racism. And he says, it is not you who is my enemy, it is the values and beliefs that I will struggle against to save you. And by saving the person who believes he or she is your enemy, by saving them, we are all contributing to creating a new nation. I guess that's what I wanted to say too, Zelaya. You know, I wanted to, sometimes you can't remember everything, you can't get everything straight as you say it. But King is the philosopher of a new America. He is the thinker for a new American revolution. And sometimes things have to get real bad in order for people to get involved to solve the problem. You know what I'm saying? And we're like at that point. Things are real bad. And I don't just mean, most people are eating, although we have hunger, we have homelessness, we have other things like that. But the greatest crisis of any society is a spiritual crisis. When people don't believe any longer in themselves or in their society. Let me just say Philadelphia again. Most Philadelphians, especially those who have grown up in Philadelphia, have lived in Philadelphia all of their lives, are disappointed. We are in a dark place of disappointment. How could our city that worked, people worked, how could it get to this point? How could this happen? And no answers. Not even an attempt to discuss it broadly with the masses of people. How could this be? It is because of the depth of the moral crisis, of the pessimism, of the nihilism of young people for whom life means nothing, not discussed. We must have the courage to confront this crisis. And it takes courage, simple courage. You see what I'm saying? I'm sorry, I went on a little long for that question.
Don't see
I think we
any other
have
questions in the
Kathy.
chat.
Right.
Yeah, I
This
think
is
we have.
Kathy Hale. I work at the State Library of Pennsylvania. And I want to say that we heard, I think, some of the vision that can be continued from Martin Luther King Jr. in the poetess that we had for the inauguration. What I want to ask you, Dr. Montiero, is do you see other people on the horizon who have the vision of Martin Luther King?
Well, Kathy, I'm kind of smiling because, most times when you talk about social change, it's not the people you see who make the difference. It's those who you don't see. Those who are not seeking publicity, but are seeking the truth. So I'm optimistic that there are more people out there like ourselves who aspire to know the truth and realize the truth can make you free. We're not alone in this. But if you want to see them on the national media, you won't. If you want to see them celebrated by the ruling elite, you won't. But they will operate and are operating in discrete communities of committed people. There is that church, there is that mosque, there is that synagogue, there is that group of workers in a certain union. We just don't know each other like we ultimately must, but we will. That is my optimism. And I'm also optimistic because Martin Luther King lived. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for the fact that he lived and that his words and his speeches and his writing are still available. And no matter what the elite do to diminish and really make him invisible, that it's still out there. We can still find his words and we can still find his writing and we can study it. We must study it. And we must be honest, honesty, humility, important values that are not promoted in popular media, popular culture. It's the opposite. When was the last time you heard an artist sing, "War is not the answer. Only love can conquer hate"? That's Marvin Gaye, by the way. When was the last time you heard that? When was the last time you heard a musician compose a great suite entitled "A Love Supreme"? You understand what I'm saying? They're out there. Somebody is doing it, but it's not going to be promoted in the national media for obvious reasons. Can I just say one other thing, Zulaya? Just one other thing. Another difficult thing that we have to face. There's a small group of us who benefit from the large mass of us not doing well. In other words, during COVID, while people couldn't go to work, the billionaire class made more billions. You understand what I'm saying? Some people benefit from the rest of us not doing well. Philadelphia, they're real estate and property developers that benefit from people losing their homes. They pay no taxes. We pay all the taxes. And then the superintendent of schools comes out and says, well, the crisis of the school system was that we never had enough funding. Well, why did you not say that all of these years and lead a protest to get more money? You understand what I'm saying? Who were you serving? Us or the small group who get it all while we and our families get little or nothing?
And I think there's quite a few of us on the chat that really relate and second that thought. I want to ask if Divya is available. I think Divya had a question next.
Thank you
Pardon
so
me.
much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Zulai. I wanted to ask about the title of your piece, Dr. Montiero, Wilderness.
Yes.
And I think it's just the most apt and apt way to put it because of the reference to the story of Moses. But then my question is, what is wilderness? And it's the distinction between civilization and wilderness. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that, because it seems to me connected to Plato in many ways, who Dr. King was so fond of quoting, and the critique of the senses. Because everything is just sensory overload. And it just seems to me, I'm reading, Du Bois's essay, The Revelation of Saint Ord, the Damned. And in it, he just puts his finger on all of this in such a concise way. He says, gentlemen are bred, not born. Through the training of body and mind. Why do we organize industry for private wealth rather than public weal? And it's just as you say, you know, we walk past every day and we have all this technology. We have all, you know, we boast about it. You know, we're entering this new age of digital revolution, and production can do, you know, we can produce and clothe and feed every single person in this world, in the city, starting with the city, since we're here, but in every city or town or village. So, I mean, knowing that, what can we, how can we gather?
Yeah, that's, you see, and you know, Divya, I would say this, you know, one thing I want to start, and I said this already, and it's something that I can't get my head around. I can't come to grips with. Churches being sold when people need churches to gather in, to pray in, to reflect in, to commune in, and they're being closed. I honestly, I just can't understand it. It's not as though they're not needed. They're needed more than ever. And out of the church, and especially the Black church, have come some of our greatest leaders, have come our greatest music, by the way. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, the question is always, what is to be done? You asked the question of in the wilderness. And you're right, I agree with the way you put it. Moses in the wilderness. What occurs when a whole nation is in the wilderness? And being in a wilderness means there's no leadership. And when I say leadership, I'm not talking about politicians. I don't consider politicians, I'm not against all politicians, just most of them, but I just don't see them as leaders. They're not in this to lead. Leadership is first and foremost a moral enterprise. That's why for Black people, so many leaders come out of the church and Black Christian theology, because it emphasizes the moral, the human, and freedom. And Black church has so much to teach the nation and religion generally in this country, and has done that, by the way. But yeah, that's why I use the wilderness. I agree with you very much about Plato, the senses, that we have to transcend the life only concerned with the senses, with the material, with the immediate gratification. I agree with very much with all of that. And I think that at this time, the nation, more than anything, needs a radical revolution of values, a moral renaissance, which puts people before profit, etc.
We want to go ahead and conclude on that note. And once again, thank you, Dr. Montiero. Our Philadelphia regional office to the PHRC, we want to host you for a conversation that we're going to be having in the spring with regards to our Asian American Pacific Islander Initiative. Some of the people you know, Andy Toy, John Chen, and multiple others. And so we'll keep you abreast of that. We want to also thank the 75 people who are still here. At our highest, we had 99 people in the middle of the day, notwithstanding the number of people that were on Facebook. Thank you for being active in the chat. Thank you for raising the pertinent questions during the Q&A. Zulai, thank you for hosting it with brilliance and eloquence. And Laura, as always, as our Director of Communications and Social Justice spokesperson, thank you for putting this together.
Chad, let me just say something before I leave. If you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Do you mind?
I don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, again, I want to thank you all. I just want to thank the questions, the people who participated in asking questions, because I don't come to this assuming to have all the answers or any of the answers. For me, this was a magnificent experience. I never expected it would be this good. So I really want to thank you all. I mean, and everyone who participated. I learned, I feel I feel invigorated by the whole thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And this concludes our MLK lecture. And we look forward to sharing with you some of the emergent themes and things that we're doing at the PHRC via social media. Have a great day.
It's fantastic.